Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
Jake Day has been known as the mayor of Salisbury until now. He has left that position to join the Moore administration as Secretary of Housing and Community Development. You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Day was born and raised in Salisbury, and he has deep roots in the community, with his father, Randy Day, taking over as the CEO of Purdue Farms, a major employer in the region. His first foray into electoral politics was the Salisbury City Council, becoming president before seeking the mayor's office in 2015. And we have him on the phone this morning. Welcome to the program.
Don, thank you.
So let me ask you, first of all, what was it like growing up in Salisbury? Obviously, it's much different now than it was then.
It is, but, in many ways, through a child's eyes, I thought of it as the perfect place to grow up. I loved Salisbury, and it was a place where I saw myself living in order to invest myself in the place for the rest of my life. And so far, so good. I've found my way back home.
How do you think it shaped the way you see the world?
Well, again, I had a really nice childhood. I really enjoyed the neighborhood I grew up in. I grew up in the Camden neighborhood. My perception was that Salisbury was a safe and wonderful place. It wasn't until, I became mayor and became more interested in statistics and trends and factors that shape and influence quality of life that I realized that the 80s and 90s were our high crime era. We had a lot of challenges during those times, and again in the early 2000s. But I didn't perceive that. The challenges that we and many other cities faced during that era. As a child, I was insulated from that. But how did it shape my perception of the world? It was a small city, but I could see that it was a growing city. Things were changing, and I wanted to see them continue to change for the better. Really for all people in our community. I was really blessed that I grew up in a diverse city. I went to James M. Bennett High School, went to public schools in Wycomico County, and I got to see a diverse city, and I thought that made for the best possible community. So I think all of that influenced me seeking a world where we each contributed to making it a better place. And, my little corner of it, my place, was my hometown, Salisbury.
So I understand originally you had planned a career in the military, but instead went into architecture and design and ultimately, obviously, into politics. And I understand that your father has been quoted as saying that he didn't expect you to take up politics. How did that arc take place?
Okay. So, the interest in the military began young with, like any little boy, I guess, with G.I. Joes and He-Man and Micro Machines. And, I was like any other kid playing guns in the backyard. And I looked at our heroes. I think I was shaped in some sense by the Gulf War in the early 90s and an interest in that. And I wanted to join the military. Mom and Dad really didn't like that idea. They thought architecture school was a better idea. And I had a passion for that, too. I had great teachers, particularly in the TAD program in North Salisbury Elementary School. I saw that was a way to influence the world around you through design and planning. And so I went to architecture school. And I think that seemed like a very steady, stable career choice to my family and to me, too. Until I realized a lot of the decisions that I cared about weren't being made on the drafting board, but they were being made by elected officials and community and civic organizations and investors and banks. And that's where the decisions were getting made that shaped our built environment. And so politics drew me in and government drew me in. And maybe some of it was altruistic, but a lot of it was also oriented on that's where I could really have the most effect on shaping the world around me.
So tell me a little bit about your decision then to enter politics. What finally drew you over the line?
Well, I grew up next door to, for a period of time, former Mayor Barry Tillman, and across the street from former Council President Carolyn Hall. And you may recall, I'm sure you do, those two ran for mayor against one another. And, politics was not something discussed openly in my house growing up. So I remember, the door closing one day and Dad saying, "We're not opening that until the election's over." my perception of politics in Salisbury was, again, sort of through rose-colored glasses until I came back home. And I returned home in 2008, and what I saw for years was government officials, elected officials that I thought of as our representatives and sort of the best of us, that were engaged in personality politics and pettiness, and I've said many times, I've said to you, it seemed to me if they were so oriented on one another, they weren't oriented on us and doing the business of the people. So I thought about it. I considered it. Former Mayor Jim Ireton encouraged me to run for council in 2009 when he was running for mayor. He encouraged me again in 2011, and I just wasn't ready to get into it. It seemed a nasty business. And in 2013, I was just a little bit fed up with it. I'd been away for a month at U.S. Army Armor School, learning the profession of tankers and the cavalry, and maybe that shaped me in some way to say, when I get home, I'm going to get about the business of helping our community once and for all. But really, it was just I was fed up with the politics and the pettiness and wanted to change that.
Well, one of the things, by the way, about that era is that the former Mayor Jim Ireton seemed to be enmeshed in that, particularly with some of his allies who then seemed to then turn on each other. What do you make of, obviously, his legacy, but more importantly, that dynamic, the fact that you were stepping into this situation in which there was this conflict between these people who originally had been allies?
Well, that certainly was, I think, what happened. I don't know that I understood it that way out of the gate. I think I saw the world for what it was, and people being people, and everyone having their own aspirations and visions, and I saw people who got into it because they were community and neighborhood activists, and not to take anything away from that, but that doesn't always make for the best executives, nor does it always make for the best legislators. There's still a job to do. Legislators need to be able to write the law, make the law, and understand their role in government. And executives need to understand their role and that they don't make the law, but their job is to ask for the resources to execute and to enforce the law and to get about the job of being the leader of government. And certainly, Salisbury is not the only instance where people didn't understand their jobs. But I think that was a big part of it. People didn't know how to do their role and wanted to do each other's role. So jealousy came into effect, and control became an issue. And so, maybe even before it seemed like people turned on one another, the stage was already set for people to kind of pull in their own direction, and pretty soon everybody was pulling only for themselves and less so for the community. So my role in that was I wanted to try to bring people together and find common ground. And I remember Terry Cohen and Tim Spees, who were colleagues and friends of and allies of Debbie Campbell, the councilwoman who I unseated. I wrote them notes when I moved back, after I was elected. I wrote them notes and dropped them off at their houses and just said, hey, whatever you think of me, I assure you it's probably not true. So let's work together. And the reactions to the personal notes, but then to living up to that and proving it were positive, and we developed a really good working relationship. Didn't agree on everything, but we had a great working relationship.
Well, one of the things, by the way, in terms of politics, the thing that popped out at me was that in the last, I guess 2018, you supported Larry Hogan, a Republican. You're a Democrat, obviously. What a way to make of that. And then, obviously, in this last election, you had supported in the primary, I believe, was Peter Franchot, who was considered to be, I don't know, a conservative Democrat, but certainly a moderate Democrat, has been described. What made you decide to A, endorse Hogan, but B, then is there some trend here? Is there something we should read here?
Well, I don't know that that's reflective of a trend. And if it is, I haven't yet uncovered that about myself. But what I will say is I evaluate people. I don't love the love the whole business of endorsements. First of all, especially among politicians, it's not my favorite aspect to the job. I'm not sure how much it means. I'm not sure how much it's needed, but people do it, and it's a game we play. But what I evaluated in Governor Hogan was that I had a partner who was serving the best interests of Salisbury. Whether or not that was the best for all of Maryland, I can't say. I think his administration made decisions I certainly wouldn't have, and decisions I didn't support and don't support to this day. And I'm grateful that we have Governor Moore in place who I think will rectify, alter, and in some cases do a 180 on many of those policy decisions, particularly as they relate to the city of Baltimore. But that being said, what I saw was, as mayor of Salisbury, being selfish for Salisbury, I had a good partner in Annapolis, and I didn't know that the same could be said of Ben Jealous. And so I said, this is the guy. This is the guy for Salisbury. Peter Francho and I have been friends for a long time. He's been very supportive of me as mayor, supportive of my political career, supportive of Salisbury, and he showed up. And I knew him well, and I trusted him, and there was no reason when he asked, and he asked before anybody else asked, that I could say no to him. And when Governor Moore called me immediately after I got home from Africa, his was a name I didn't know yet. He was a person I didn't know yet, but he stunned me that in the days after landing, this guy who had not even yet announced, I think, was calling me on my cell phone at 7:30 in the morning. I think he had just got done with his PT. He assumed I had just done my PT. I should have, but I hadn't. I just crawled out of bed and was, making breakfast for the girls. And, that guy just blew me away from day one. But, again, Peter was somebody that I knew, and I knew would show up and continue to show up for Salisbury. And as mayor of Salisbury, that's how and why I made those decisions.
Yeah, you're obviously going to go on to the state level. One of the things I'm sort of interested in is how you see the tension that may exist between rural areas and city areas, Baltimore obviously being the biggest, but because there has been some discussion about, from a political standpoint, certainly Larry Hogan paid a lot of attention to the rural areas. That was certainly his political bailiwick, but he paid a lot of attention, as you indicated, with your own working relationship with him. How do you see that tension being resolved in terms of trying to do the kind of job that you're now going to be involved with?
Yeah, I think it could be said that elected officials feel responsible to their base. That's not news, and I think that could be used to characterize different administrations. That's not really how I would characterize the Hogan administration as in service to rural Maryland. I think they did a good job of connecting to rural Maryland, and I think the Moore administration is going to do the same, and I'm going to be a part of that. And my fellow cabinet nominees, Secretary Kurtz in DNR, Secretary Addix in Ag, Secretary Flora in Planning, these are going to be stalwart advocates for rural Maryland, for the Eastern Shore. These are not people who are going to live their lives trapped in State Circle. So I don't fear what's to come for rural Maryland. I'm excited about what's to come for rural Maryland. And let's, I take sort of a planner's approach to this, and maybe a geographer's approach to this, which is that the hinterlands, our agricultural landscape and our natural landscape are necessary for thriving places. And in turn, thriving places serve as the centers of economy, commerce, culture, society, that serve people, whether they live right in the city or whether they live, in rural Maryland and, out on a farm. Those cities still provide value. And so we're all interconnected. And so it's not so easy to divide the success of one from the other. And I believe this to be true as well. As the secretary who is the Eastern Shore native and is one of two who currently reside on the Eastern Shore, of course I feel a responsibility to my shore compatriots and partners, and I'm going to represent them the best I can, as I'm going to continue to represent Salisbury. But know this, Maryland can't succeed if Baltimore fails. And so we've got a lot of work to do in the city of Baltimore, and they're doing amazing things right now. I got to see the reopening of Lexington Market, the new Lexington Market yesterday. There's amazing things happening. There's a lot of energy, but we've got to be there all together, whether we're in Salisbury or Cumberland or La Plata. We've got to be there for our friends in Baltimore in order to see success throughout this state.
What do you see as a difference then in terms of concerns when it comes to, say, a big city like Baltimore as opposed to the smaller cities like Salisbury?
Well, scale is a big problem. I mean, if there are 15,000 vacant homes in Baltimore, it's not as if we have a proportionate number of vacant homes in Salisbury. And that doesn't mean our economics are simply more sound. It means that scale begets new problems, and atrophy begins to cement over time with those problems in scale. And so, whether it's 15,000 vacants, whether it's 1,000 people moving out of Baltimore a year, those things produce additional, they multiply into additional problems. And so I think we've got a lot of work to do to help those issues. Not every program that helps Baltimore is going to be applicable at a smaller scale in Salisbury, so we are going to need to devise different solutions. But the sort of surgical, the acupuncture approach that we can take to a neighborhood in Easton or a neighborhood in Silver Spring is going to not be scalable because of simply limited resources to Baltimore. So we're going to have to devise new programs to attract private investment. That's I think a huge key is we've got to create tools that attract private investment. And the department that I am taking over, the department that I'm now leading, is really good at that. We've got incredibly talented people who have devised fantastic programs, tax credits, bond programs that pair with private sector investments that produce results from a socioeconomic perspective, from a shelter perspective, from an affordability perspective, and then also produce results for investors.
I mean, one would think that there might be a tension between big cities and small cities, or the rural areas, in terms of just simply state resources, that there will be, everybody's fighting for a limited amount of money in terms of the pot, as it were, and that there will be a tension between those folks, for instance, the rural areas who say, we need roads or we need this, as opposed to cities which clearly can say, well, gee, but we have a larger number of people, for example. How do you see that tension over resources itself?
You're right, and I think it's a constant balancing act. Many of the resources that we have in the Department of Housing and Community Development are related to affordable housing, developing affordable housing, whether that's single-family, owner-occupied, or multifamily. And those programs rely on jurisdictions seeking those funds. They rely on developers and jurisdictions working together to seek those funds. So one of the great challenges that I see coming up is not so much the tension between resources, whether it's in a big city or small city or rural communities, but I see that tension as there are going to be places that need affordable housing. Excuse me. That recognize that their constituents are crying out for help, and then battle against the forces of NIMBYism, excuse me, and anti-development. And those two things cannot coexist. We have to see that every community in America and in Maryland is fighting an affordability crisis right now. And so everybody's got to do their part to take on additional housing in order to house the people that are otherwise at risk of becoming homeless.
In terms of certainly, in terms of your own approach, some people would say you might be a bit on the progressive side of things, I guess it were, in terms of the Democratic Party. You certainly spoke out when it came to the Confederate flag for General Winder. You put up of course, the plaque to commemorate the lynching of Matthew Williams. Certainly saw minorities as a particularly important part of the city. I think it's something like 47% of the population here in Salisbury. How do you characterize yourself, and how do you approach those issues?
You know, I think many people would say the same thing, and they would characterize me the same way. And
You think it's not fair?
I think it's fair. I wouldn't disagree,
yeah.
but I also think each of those decisions taken in isolation is one about treating people fairly, and it's about acknowledging that that justice requires recognition that the past is ugly in some cases, and history is not always something we can be proud of. I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of my grandfathers. I'm proud of my country. I'm proudly serving my country. Almost every job I've had has been in service to community or country in some way. That doesn't mean we don't acknowledge the truth about the past. Excuse me, what's happened in this country, and so whether it's a memorial to those who were lynched because of their race, whether it's acknowledging the past and bringing together people to begin to identify other policy changes that are needed in the future. You want to call that progressive? Okay, sure. But I think more accurately, it's about justice, and it's doing what's right. I was raised in a household that was focused on loving all people and focusing on bettering what was bad about the world around us. That didn't mean my parents taught me doom and gloom. They didn't, but they certainly taught me that not everyone was treated fairly and for reasons that were completely unfair. So I've tried to lead in such a way that would, I think, reflect those values and make decisions that would reflect those values. And I think I've been given the reins of a department that has the power to do a lot of good in those areas. I think with Governor Moore, we are going to work hard to unwind the legacy of redlining in our cities. We are going to work hard to shelter all people, to leave no Marylander behind, as our governor has said. And I believe I've got a lot of tools to make that happen. Economic justice and economic equity, in our cities, in our towns, and for those who have historically been marginalized because of their race, whether individually or whether it's a legacy of family and generations. We have and to right those wrongs.
Well, looking at nationally, what do you make of the division that seems to be taking place on the national level? I mean, we have obviously a lot of things coming out of Florida about schools and how race is taught, the LGBTQ issue, for instance, in education. There seems to be some division. How do you read the country as you look out at that landscape?
I like to think that the dying throes of bigotry manifest themselves in certain policy fits and starts, and in certain exertions of power. I like to think that we are on a constant and unending trajectory toward being a country that truly lives up to our founding principles, of justice for all and equality for all, and the words. I mean, not necessarily how we live, but the words. That's what I like to think. But I know we're battling ourselves, and there is a lot of division. So the best antidote to that is helping set an example that uplifts all people, that doesn't subjugate anyone else because of their race or because of their gender or their sexual orientation or whatever their however they identify. So for what that means is for white men who are fearful of what's happening. I think we have to demonstrate for them, you will not be less of an American or less of a person either. This is about equality and lifting people up, not holding anyone down. And are there limited resources and limited means? Maybe, yeah. But I think more likely we will find, as we often have, and this is an argument I've made in terms of the economics of place as well, is that you will see that more resources will be produced when more people have an opportunity to participate equally in the world around them, whether that's the labor market, whether that's their education, whether that's in the free market as entrepreneurs. The more people that are lifted up, the more is going to be created. And so I think the proof will be there that will quiet those fears over time. But I think that's a long battle. It's not a quick battle. And so proving it by being government leaders, by being public leaders, by being public voices that say, we're going to show you that the world can get better and America can get better and Maryland can get better for everybody. That's going to be the evidence that will, over the long term, change hearts, I think.
Well, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, we just had this recent issue in Memphis in which an African-American man was beaten by some 5 officers, also happened to be African-American. What do you make of that? What is your reaction to that? And what does one do about that, do you think?
Well, I have not watched the video. It's not something I want to watch. It's not something I can imagine watching. But it is unconscionable that anyone would bring violence upon anyone else unnecessarily under the guise of their authority. And so it's disgusting to think that it happens. It's shocking to see that it happens over and over again, that the abuse of power pervades many departments, many agencies. This is not the only one. And so what's the solution to that? I don't know. I'm at a loss. I don't know how human beings treat each other that way. And sure, there are countless more violent criminal people that don't wear a badge than those that do. The challenge we all have, and I think the thing that's difficult to stomach is that these people are people that we trust and are supposed to trust, and so it's disappointing to say the least, but it's fear-inducing. I think as average Americans who walk around and hope that when we're in our worst moment, our police officers are who we turn to. It's disconcerting, and it makes you fearful. Now, that being said, I've had the good fortune of working with police officers for the last 10 years, and I've gotten to know our Salisbury police officers. And some of them didn't make it. Some of them were fired, and some of them were criminally prosecuted in certain cases, not for actions on the job, but for actions outside of work. Some of them were simply shown that they didn't have the record that we wanted, and they couldn't stay here and couldn't be part of the team. But it's such a tiny group compared to those who did the right thing day in and day out and represented their citizens well, represented their name well and their family, and wore the badge with honor and did the job that you and I would expect them to do. So I know that it can be depressing to see that this is happening again in America, and another example of this. And there's lots of reasons to be serious about the business of reforming our criminal justice system. And we by the way, won't always get that right. I can tell you, Maryland is working hard to get that right. I think we're zeroing in on what that looks like, and we're not quite there yet, but we're zeroing in on that, and I'm sure the General Assembly will continue to work on that this year. But as a person who led 103 police officers every day, I am confident that most of the times you're going to encounter a police officer, you're encountering a good man or woman who's going to work just like you every day, but is willing to put their life on the line to protect you and will do everything they can to uphold the law and apply it equally to all people.
And just finally, sort of two-part question. One is obviously Wes Moore becomes the first African-American to become governor of this state. Kind of interested in what you think that means. And for your own future, you're obviously now in a cabinet. We got Pete Buttigieg out there who was mayor and now is in a national position, I believe, transportation. What do you see for your future?
Okay, so what do I think Wes Moore being the first African-American governor of Maryland means?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's reflective of a changing America. I also think it's reflective of, just how fast and high people can ascend when they reflect and live the values that he writes about in his book, and that he has espoused from day one since I've known him. Wes is an incredible leader, and he's an incredible orator, and he's a person that is captivating, and who you can, I think, quickly trust that if this is a man who says that this is where we're going and who lays out a clear vision, he can take us there. So I think it's reflective, one, of a changing America and more opportunity for all, but in parallel to that, it just shows you that in America, no matter your race, no matter your gender, no matter your background or where you started, you can do incredible things, and he is doing incredible things. As for me, I've got a long time that I'm going to be devoted to this job. So I hope I get 8 years to do this work and to help Maryland communities thrive and to help them thrive more equitably. And so I'm very focused on that. We'll see what that means for the future. I couldn't possibly tell you at this point. I do look to other mayors as role models who have risen into positions of leadership, including our Secretary of Housing, U.S. Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, a former mayor, and U.S. Secretary of Transportation, a former mayor as well. And as our governor said last night, and I hope he continues to say it, I get the title of mayor for life, so I'm going to hold on to that one.
We've been speaking with Jake Day, former mayor of Salisbury, now the Secretary of Housing and Community Development in the Moore administration. We appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Don, it's always a pleasure. I look forward to coming back.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.